You may want to be another brand, but if your core attributes and the experiences that your customers have with your brand don't live up to that, it's a futile undertaking.
Hey, welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman. Unleashed is produced by Umbrex, the first global community connecting top-tier independent management consultants with one another. If you are interested in connecting with other independent consultants to build relationships, share lessons learned, and explore ways to collaborate, email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. We just heard from today's guest, Umbrex member and BCG alum Ilana Grossman, a marketing consultant based in New York City. Her firm is called B2Both, since she works with both B2B and B2C clients. Ilana has been the chief marketing officer at several rapidly growing companies, and we discuss the role of the chief marketing officer and how it is changing, key performance indicators in the world of marketing, and what it is like being an independent consultant focused on marketing. You can learn more about Ilana's firm at b2both.com. Hello, Ilana. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Will. Good to be here.
Ilana, tell me some of the biggest concerns on the minds of the chief marketing officer today.
Oh, great question. There's definitely a range, and the concerns vary. If we're talking to startups, for example, I'd say the number one concern, even for mature startups, is growth, right? If we look at sources of growth, they're really becoming more expensive, and there are many limiting factors there. If we think about Google and Facebook, they concentrate 2/3 of the advertising dollars, and these are getting more expensive. So number one for startups for sure. On the large company side, I would say the bigger concern is really there's some distrust of traditional media buying companies and agencies. A lot of large companies are bringing their media buying capabilities in-house, and there's much greater focus on quality. They want their ads to be placed in front of real people from their target audience in an appropriate environment and have it really be delivered in a way that is measurable so that they can really connect to business impact. These are the two leading concerns that I see nowadays.
Now, you have had several times you've served as the chief marketing officer or the interim chief marketing officer for startups in the mature size, Series D, Series E, 50 to 200 employees. Tell us, what are the elements of that job? So if for a chief marketing officer at a company with 50 to 200 employees, what does that person do?
Oftentimes, marketing in startups is an afterthought, unfortunately. So even though companies are Series D and E, by the time I get there, I still have to structure a team. That's number one, right? In terms of scope, it entails everything from PR, which is also referred to as comms, all the way to the function of growth, which is acquisition, retention, segmentation, CRM, all the way to brand management. So that's the typical full scope that falls under these assignments. Depending on the assignment and the brand, we'll focus more on some of these pieces versus others, but that's usually the full scope of oversight.
And let's go through each one of those in turn. I'd love to hear some of the things you've done and some lessons learned that you have.
Well, startups are really focused on growth, as you know, right? So I oftentimes tell founders who hire me not to overlook the importance of branding. It's interesting because with large companies, they're big on branding. There is no hesitation to really invest in campaigns that will provide really increased brand awareness and engagement. But in startups, they're really focused on acquisition and growth. And oftentimes there's waste of money because they don't start beforehand to really craft and nail the brand positioning and the value proposition for the different segments, right? So that's one area that I ask founders, let's take a step back and align on this so that the dollars that we put in acquisition and demand generation will really work hard for us. on a focused manner. That's the number one area that really gets founders, I would say, awake at night.
So let's stay on that one for just a minute. When you say, brand positioning and branding, what does that mean? How would you define that term? Explain what tasks are associated with that, what that involves.
Many times the brand is trying to be everything to everybody, right? A positioning is basically a mental space that you occupy in the minds of your customers and prospective customers vis-a-vis other competitors in your space, right? So your brand positioning, it's never explicit. You don't use that language in marketing materials. It's really internal language. But your brand positioning would really associate your brand with some core attributes. And the brand positioning cannot really be defined by you. You can define that and stretch that, but it's really grounded on perceptions and realities of the marketplace, right? You may want to be another brand, but if your core attributes and the experiences that your customers have with your brand don't live up to that, it's a futile undertaking, right? So you try to really understand the attributes your customers think of when they think of you, when they interact with your brand, and build on that, bake a little bit of, aspirational thinking into it, and then nail a statement that basically defines what you do, to whom, and how you're different from other players in the field. That's basically a positioning statement. And then based on that, every piece of communication that you develop, you can measure against that positioning statement to see if it's still consistent. Does it make sense?
Yes. So, okay, so that's branding. What are some of the other kind of areas of responsibility, when you go in as a chief marketing officer?
Finding the right customers and make sure they come back. And so growth, right? Typically, how many signups do you have every month? Managing your customer acquisition costs, making sure your CAC, as we call, stays below either your customer lifetime value or whatever payback period you establish, ahead of time with your CFO and with management. So let's say we decide that we make $100 out of customers on average in the first 2 years, and that's what we're going to fund for acquisition. We're going to fund 2 years of payback period, right? So we're willing to spend at best top $100 to acquire a customer. So managing that equation according to whichever parameters you establish with your management is very, very much a focus on startups that are focused on growth. It's part of the growth reality. I'd say that's the number 2 big area that we focus on. After that, we can talk about retention if you're interested.
Yes.
Yeah, that's an interesting part also. And many companies make the mistake to really try to market to the average customer. And the truth is that that's a wrong practice, right? Your customer base is very heterogeneous. And once you acquire these customers, and in the beginning, at the early phases, startups should really be focused on acquisition, right? But after you have 2-3 years of data and appropriate tagging, and you can actually map the interactions that these customers had with multiple touch points and their actual transactions, you should be assigning different customer lifetime values to each of them and bucketing them into cohorts. And your marketing should really speak to the high value cohort, not to the average customer. And that's a practice that many companies haven't nailed yet.
Can you give me an example of that, of what that would look like to speak to your high value customers and not so much just the average?
For example, even the media buy, right? And how your value proposition to recurring customers who buy many times. So let's take an example, right? Buying art, it's not a homogeneous. There's no average customer, right? You have a small subset that buys a lot and comes back, right? How much you're going to spend to reach those customers, which channels you're going to choose to put your money on, If you're marketing to the average person, you may end up drafting a whole marketing strategy that is going to put you in, banner advertising and advertising across media. And the reality is most of the people we may attract may not end up becoming good customers. That is true for, I would say, many premium categories, right? I know furniture has a lot of examples also. Furniture industry has some case studies. Of attracting the right customers and targeting to them. So if you're talking about marketing to your high value customers, your CAC is going to be higher, right? Your customer acquisition cost. Your channel mix is going to be very different. You're probably going to be able to market much more efficiently if you know who they are, and how you talk to them is probably different because they're looking for a different set of value propositions from a customer who may try once and not be sure if he or she will come back. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So how would you compare, because you do work with, startups, but you also do work with large companies.
Yeah.
And I think you told me that you're currently working on kind of some large advertising campaigns and looking at the effectiveness of them. Could you talk a little bit about that difference between serving a kind of a startup company and the different concerns they have, in the marketing group at a larger company?
So large companies, right now, as I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of companies are revisiting their media mix, media buying approach. There are a number of factors for that, right? Some large companies, not all of them, differently from startups, they really struggle to keep up with some of the changes in technology, consumer habits. And one of the things that I love as a consultant is really being able to act as a conduit of some of the most progressive marketing practices from startup companies, bring them to large companies, but also bring a lot of the excellence from large companies back to startup companies. But a lot of these legacy companies, or some of them, really they're still in the era of big media plans that take multiple weeks to be crafted, launching campaigns and sort of not in agile mode, delivering partial measurements of some branding campaigns. Sometimes you'll get reports that really use, let's say, social media mentions or social media engagement as an evidence of impact. And the truth is, this is not an evidence of impact, right? Anyone running a large-scale campaign today should be able to connect their effort with their ability to create and retain loyal customers. And that's a big concern today in large companies. How do we get to connect the upper funnel spending directly to transactional impact? And some of these businesses, they happen entirely online. Some of them don't. They're not closed online. So that's a big challenge that startups, by virtue of being predominantly digital, top to bottom, don't face. This is just one of them.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. I'd love to hear your perspective on how companies are measuring the impact of their advertising campains.
Many companies that stand in upper funnel are now changing their media mix. I work with a client today that is a B2B, very large B2B campaign. We're gradually shifting the focus of our campaign to really focus more, have a big component of what we call account-based marketing, targeting the high-value customers they have and high potential prospects, mixing that with upper funnel in branding. We are evolving their campaign to really cut a lot of the waste in media buying. So, for example, instead of buying publishers just by the audience description that these publishers provide, what we're really doing is we tag customers all the way from the advertising unit down to the interaction of that customer from that source, from that creative unit with the content of the client's website, right? And we segment them based on the level of engagement that they present in that session, and we score them appropriately. So we create a whole B2B funnel, so to speak, that allows leads and visits from advertising campaigns to come to the website, be characterized, have multiple touch points, and then become a lead and be scored appropriately. And depending on the scoring and the stage of that lead and their readiness for the sales department, we pass them on to sales. So building that funnel is the way that we're measuring that. But the key thing there that is exciting is, in this particular engagement, I worked with some of the internal resources to build a whole measurement dashboard that connects all the what we call pre-click data or above the funnel data from the campaign with below the funnel data, right? What happens lower funnel data or post-click data to make sure we can attribute engagement on our site, engagement with our content to specific sources of traffic. That's really something that a lot of startups already do that. Not all of them, some do. But a lot of the big companies don't necessarily track things at that level when it comes to large advertising campaigns.
Now, are we talking primarily about digital campaigns? Because how would you track the effectiveness of like television or print media? There's not.
Yes. No, that's true. These are heavily digital campaigns. If you have print, the best practice is, and you can't capture the whole thing there, right? The whole impact. But you can put an vanity URL in each print unit, in each ad, and you know the source if you get visits from there, right? But there is a component of brand awareness that if that is one of the KPIs of the campaign, and it should be, otherwise you wouldn't be buying media, you wouldn't be buying print or TV, the typical way to measure is through a brand lift study. So in addition to kind of performance metrics of click, sign-ups, and leads, you would pair it up with a pre- and post survey that can be done by different publishers in which you buy media, but the right way to be done is really across the board with the right sort of customer base, and you can see the brand lift impact that the campaign had at the awareness level.
So let's take one level deeper on this measuring the effectiveness. Could you get into kind of some of the specific KPIs and just go through that whole funnel again, a little slower, and walk us through what are some of the KPIs that you look at each stage? And, I'd love to hear the source of that data.
So obviously the funnel and the KPIs will vary depending on the brand, right? The brand will define what makes sense for them. So in the upper funnel level, if a brand is sponsoring or running an awareness campaign, what we would do is use for brand lift metrics such as brand awareness. Do you recognize this brand? Do you associate this commercial or this message with that brand, right? You would have typically unaided questions or partially aided questions with different brands there to see if the audience really attributes that message to the right brand, right? And you would go as far as asking these prospective customers about intent. Would you be more likely to consider buying from this brand in X interval of time? These are very typical KPIs in the upper funnel.
How do you do that? Is that an online survey, or are you stopping people in the mall? Like, how do you actually ask those questions?
Yeah, so there are tools online that enable you to do that. They typically rely on their own proprietary panels and methodologies of recruiting that are not necessarily perfect for a lot of brands. They're good for a quick kind of checkpoint. But the large brands, such as the ones I'm currently working with, would hire a company like, and this is not an endorsement, but, Contrary Millward Brown. It's a WPP agency that only does that. And they have panels that they put together from different recruiting sources that match your target audience. That's why those panels those research efforts end up being more expensive. They usually serve the survey online, but to members of those panels that are intercepted through different sources. There's always a bias in terms of people who agree to participate. But usually the design of the composition of the panel, that's a whole other science in and of itself. And these companies have real statisticians and true professionals that come up with the composition in a way that is accurate and representative, and they give you results in terms of lift and brand recognition and intent with the right statistical significance and confidence interval.
Okay, so this is interesting to me. So it's really kind of the survey-based way of measuring it and not some sort of sophisticated way of measuring the person's behavior of what they do afterwards online necessarily of their brand awareness. But keep going.
You're absolutely right. And that's basically where most brands have been until very recently, right? You couldn't really connect to the transaction. But that's still how a lot of the brands, in terms of, okay, now people associate our message more with our product, right? And it's a way to differentiate. Now, the pressure that these big brands have today is to go further down the funnel. So what can these KPIs be? Back to your original question, right? When you have a more digitally heavy campaign, which is what a lot of brands are going through today, they're really being pushed to increase the digital share of their campaigns to a much higher one so that you can get to some sort of attribution, business attribution, right? So usually you would design a drive to web campaign with multiple touch points, all of these touch points through different channels, whether they be display or Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, if you're targeting specific B2B accounts. Everybody's tagged. They interact with your content on those platforms, and then they click through, interact with your content in your properties. And all those interactions are tagged and recorded and analyzed over time. And based on those interactions, we give that lead a score. And for that visit to become a lead, what you need to do is really enable them to provide their own personal information. And a big issue today is usage of third-party data. Nobody wants to touch it. Due to GDPR in Europe, the upcoming version in California in 2020, you need to have first-party data if you're a serious brand. You would nobody today, if you're a serious brand, you would market to people based on, names that you acquired through a third-party source in a sketchy way. So you would encourage people to sign up for something. It can be a program, can be content, can be for a webinar, can be to receive a coupon, depending if you're a B2C business, right? You would offer a value proposition for that, and in exchange for their personal information. And based on their interactions, you segment them appropriately and you score them regarding their potential to become a paying customer or a high-value customer. And from that point on, every communication and touch point they receive is customized based on their value. And the moment they convert, meaning they really buy, that's a whole other customer, right? A whole other segment.
How are you doing that How are you doing that scoring? If let's say the person's given you their name and email, how do you evaluate their value as a customer? How do you score them?
It's very much on a case by case. So marketing would get together with the business owner of that service, right? Or if it's a startup, it's the product team. It's a big company, is potentially the service line. And we would say we're going to have a scoring from 0 to 10 or 0 to 30. If somebody signs up for a webinar, that's at the highest value action, right? If somebody just downloads a paper, that has, lower value. If somebody shares a piece of content via social, you really assign points. It's not a formulaic exercise, and it's done in conjunction with the business owners. And you use a marketing automation tool to really segment these people based on these interactions and forward them customized communications from there, right? And these tools can be, Sales Through or Marketo or HubSpot, Eloqua. These are all great tools that allow you to capture leads, segment them based on their actions, and follow up with customized communications from that point on.
Okay.
So KPIs there would be leads, how many leads you captured, right? And if you want to go really down to business impact, what you're talking about is, the holy grail would be in the case of, I would say, a B2B operation, the holy grail would be, an MQL, which we call it's a marketing qualified lead. And at that point, once marketing qualifies a lead, you can pass them to sales. Salespeople, usually these marketing automation systems speak with Salesforce and softwares alike, right? And from that point on, salespeople can call them for more personalized interaction.
Fantastic. Switching gears a little bit, in the world of independent consulting, you and I were chatting earlier how, kind of marketing consultants as independent marketing consultants, there's some slight differences from someone who's doing strategy consulting, let's say. What would you say is different about being an independent consultant in marketing?
I think it's very dependent on execution to prove value. I also think because marketing, you don't necessarily see results in the short term. And a lot of customers want, guaranteed results. I've had prospective clients call me like, if I do this, what's the ROI? And I have to say, like, we don't know. We haven't done it yet. It's an experiment. A lot in marketing is experimentation, right? So I spend a lot of time also in the forefront aligning with clients on an SOW, a statement of work, both with regards to process deliverables, because I think due to the less concrete nature of the beast, it's very important to manage expectations and align before you start to ensure a successful engagement.
Okay. And so have you seen kind of engagements go, are they typically longer, or what's the typical duration?
I have really tried to stay with customers for at least 6 months. I've had one assignment that was 3 months long, but most of my engagements have really been multi-month. I'm now running at like over a year with a client who's seeing a lot of impact and wants to expand a lot of what we're seeing. So I think these longer time frames are really important in marketing because you need to work with the client's team also to implement. You don't implement alone. And those interactions are not necessarily easy. You need to build trust. You need to build relationships. You need to get buy-in for your vision. You need to equip your clients to sell in internally, especially in large companies. They spend a lot of their time doing internal sell-in and socializing ideas. So longer engagement time frames are more conducive to good outcomes.
Marketing is changing so quickly. How do you personally stay current with all of the latest tools and technology that's available?
It's such a good question. Look, I read a lot of blogs from, if you ask me to take one, I remember, Moz, SEO, right? Their blog is their content marketing strategy, which was basically the tool that made them so successful. If you want to learn search, follow their blog. It's brilliant. So a lot of the startups that have offerings for marketing have amazing content that they offer. I love to consume those. I find it very useful to kind of be in touch with the latest and greatest. I would also say that kind of flipping between working with large companies and startups really gives me that breadth of what's the best in class across a big range of marketing services, right? So if you're working with a leading agency for a big brand, part of a huge agency network, you're going to see how they have refined all their programmatic offerings, their measurement offerings, at a scale that startups cannot consume and afford. So that's very good as well. So working with a variety of customers is how I also stay in touch. I think if you stay too long in one customer type, that it's kind of limiting.
Ilana, do you attend any conferences or any other kind of events to stay current beyond tracking the blogs?
Not systematically, really not systematically. I go to a variety of conferences from, tech events in the city. There was Tech New York last year. It was interesting. Then There are major advertising conferences that happen every year as well. Ad Age has events. I haven't been systematically attending those. I do, however, take a lot of advantage of the business school I attended to and the events that they offer. For example, the Wharton Club of New York hosted recently Professor Peter Fader to talk about his book in customer centricity. It was fascinating and absolutely at the cutting edge of what brands are dealing with and at the cutting edge research-wise when it comes to segmentation, focusing on the right customer. So that is very valuable and actually more valuable than popular conferences.
Ilana, for folks who want to find out more about you, do you want to give a website or other link, or what's the best way to find out what you're doing?
You can reach me at Ilana, ILANA, at b2both.com. My company is called B2Both in reference to B2C and B2B. You can find me there or visit www.b2both.com.
And we will include those links in the show notes. Ilana, this has been amazing hearing your tour through marketing with startups as well as larger companies. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is sponsored by Umbrex, the world's first global community of top-tier independent management consultants. The mission of Umbrex is to create opportunities for independent management consultants to meet, share lessons learned, and collaborate. I'd love to get your feedback and hear any questions that you'd like to see us answer on this show. You can email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. That's UMBREX.com. If you found anything on the show helpful, it would be a real gift if you would let a friend know about the show and take a minute to leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. And if you subscribe, our show will get delivered to your device every Monday. Our audio engineer is Dave Nelson. Our theme song was composed by Gary Negbauer, and I'm your host, Will Bachman. Thanks for listening.